This video is going to cover the topic of using map scales and blueprints. Be sure the date and topic are at the top of your page. The essential question to guide the video will be, how do we use proportions with maps and blueprints? All maps that we use should have some sort of scale on them. And that scale shows how many miles, or sometimes kilometers or feet, are represented by a set distance on the map itself. Take a look at the example on the page here. In your notes, just draw a line that represents R to L. You don't have to draw the whole image of the neighborhood here. But notice that there is a scale that says 1 inch on the map is equal to 3 miles in real life. So the question we would need to be able to answer to use this map in real life is, how far away is R from T? Luckily, we can use proportions to solve this. I'm just going to set up a proportion down here. So in my proportion, I'm going to use my scale and say that 1 inch is equivalent to 3 miles. And on the map, I can see here that R and T are 3 inches away. So the question is, how many miles away are there, right? And I can easily see on this one that 1 times 3 is 3. So 3 times 3 equals 9. And that's how I would use my scale to read that map. So I looked at a map of Portland and I saw that in the scale on the key it said 1 inch on the map represents 4 miles in real life. 4.5 miles in real life. On that same map, I looked from our school to one of our outdoor schools and I saw that it was 8 inches apart. So my question would be, how far away is Camp Arowana from Selwood? Right, so in my little sketch here, I have my school and I have our campsite and it's 8 inches apart. And I'm going to use proportions to figure out the distance. So I know that 4.5 miles is 1 inch, and I know already that the distance on the map between our two places is 8 inches, and so I'm trying to figure out what this would be. And of course, this one's pretty quick to scale. I can say that means times 8, so I have to multiply 4.5 times 8. And I just did my calculations over here on the side, but I can see my answer is 36, which means that Arowana is about 36 miles away from Selwood. I'm going to use this next sketch of a map here for 2 quick problems, or maybe not so quick, but in my key I see that 1/4 inch on this map rendering is equivalent to 1 mile in real world. The first one is telling us that 2 of the cities, Candler and Canton, are 9 miles apart in real life. So the question is, how far apart are they on the map? So I'm going to set up my proportion to help me find this. And as always, I'm going to start with what I know. I know the scale of the map is 1/4 inch is equal to 1 mile. And in this case, I know how many miles they are apart. So I'm going to fill in the miles section, being really intentional that things are lined up. This is what I don't know. But I can tell that 1 mile times 9 makes 9 miles. So I'm going to be multiplying my 1/4 times 9. And of course, I'm going to do that by multiplying 9 by 1 and 4 by 1. And then I'll convert that into a mixed number, which ends up being 2 1/4. So I know that they are 2 1/4 inches apart on the map. And now we see that Candler and Otine, 2 different cities, are 3.5 inches apart on the map, and our task is to figure out their actual distance between 2 towns. So again, I'm going to start with my very handy proportions. My scale is still the same, 1/4 inch is 1 mile, but this time what I know is that they're 3.5 inches apart, and I don't know how many miles they are apart in real life. So I don't know off the top of my head how many times 1/4 goes into 3.5. So what I think I'll have to do is divide to find out. And of course, in doing that, I would need to make this an improper fraction. And then I would need to use my reciprocal of my second fraction and multiply. And I didn't paste this out very well. I'm going to run out of room in my box. But it ends up being 14. And since that means this was times 14, I just have to do 1 times 14. which is of course 14. Like maps, blueprints also have scales, and a blueprint is something that shows you how to make something, like a house, right? Houses have blueprints, and that's what my example is here in my picture. So let's think about a house blueprint for an example. So if Elias were building a house and he wanted to draw his blueprint, he obviously can't draw it real size. So he uses a factor of 1 foot is equivalent to 2/10 of an inch. And when he drew out his plan, one of his walls of his bedroom measures 1 8/10 of an inch. And of course, what we would want to know is how long his actual wall will be when he builds it. So as always, I'm going to go with my handy dandy proportion and fill in what I know. And what I know is that 2/10 of an inch is equivalent to 1 foot. And I know that he has a 1.8 inch wall. But what I don't know is the actual feet of the wall. And maybe you know right away what you need to multiply 2/10 by to get 1.8. Maybe not. If you don't, you can always divide it on the side. I did that, and what I got was 9, which means I would have to multiply my number of feet by 9, so the wall would be 9 feet long. Blueprints can also be used to make like model cars, for example, or miniature things. So let's say Brandon wants to build a miniature model car based on the dimensions of like a real life typical car. The scale that he's using is that 1 foot for his real car would be equivalent to 3/10 of an inch in his model. If the real car that he's trying to make is 13.5 feet long, how long should he make his model? As always, I'm filling in what I know, and what I know is that 3/10 of an inch is equal to 1 foot, and that his real car is going to be 13.5 feet. So I'm matching my feet to feet, and I'm leaving my inches blank because that's what I'm trying to find out. Since 1 would need to be multiplied by 13.5 to get 13.5, I'll need to do the same thing in my scale model. So again, I might use some space over here to do 13.5 times my 3/10 because I don't know that off the top of my head. But when I do that, I find out the model should be 4 5/100 of an inch long. We saw a lot of examples here of using scales for different things, maps and models and blueprints. The essential question was, how do we use proportions to use scales on maps and blueprints? And so hopefully you saw that. We will certainly be practicing this a bit in class, particularly with our maps. So bring any questions you might have to class, as well as your notes.